As Donald Trump's economic policies spiral into chaos, even his most loyal allies in the financial sector are jumping ship. Once vocal supporters of America First economics, die-hard MAGA-aligned bankers and hedge fund managers are now turning against the former president after a staggering $6.4 trillion was wiped off the U.S. economy. Tariff wars, global retaliation, and a collapsing stock market have shattered confidence. This isn't conservative policy, it's sabotage, one former Trump donor-turned-critic said. Wall Street, once a stronghold of Trump's financial base, is now in open revolt. Banks are shedding MAGA-linked clients, and economic experts are calling this the most self-inflicted fiscal disaster in modern American history. Even the red hats can't cover up this level of damage. A nation in the streets. The financial fallout didn't just stay in the spreadsheets, it exploded into the streets. From New York to Nebraska, over 100,000 people marched in protest against what many now view as an administration entirely detached from economic reality. While the immediate trigger was the tariff chaos, the protests quickly expanded to include long-simmering frustrations: immigration policy, citizen rights, healthcare access, and allegations of legal rights violations under Trump's administration. What was initially described as targeted discontent grew into a sweeping social revolt. Protesters gathered not only in liberal strongholds like San Francisco and Chicago, but also in red-leaning areas like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Bozeman, Montana, places where Trump had once enjoyed unquestioned loyalty. The signs read, "We voted for jobs, not layoffs. Freedom is not a tariff, and justice can't be priced." The working class takes the hit while billionaires and hedge fund managers recalibrated their portfolios. It was the working class that bore the brunt of the collapse. Manufacturing hubs in Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania saw mass layoffs as companies like Whirlpool and Stellantis initiated large-scale job cuts. In total, March 2025 recorded 275,000 new job losses, the highest single-month spike since the darkest days of the pandemic. Working families, already living paycheck to paycheck, found themselves with no cushion. In towns like Dayton, Ohio, and Bakersfield, California, local food banks reported double the usual demand. Eviction rates spiked as landlords began processing mass notices. Consumer debt surged, with credit card delinquencies reaching their highest level in over a decade. Industries once heralded as the backbone of Trump's America First economic vision, steel, autos, and farming, were now reporting record losses. The farming belt, devastated by retaliatory tariffs from China and the European Union, saw soybean exports drop by 65% and pork shipments plummet. The ripple effects hit everything from trucking to warehouse labor. Wall Street's alarm bells: recession risk hits 45%. As the economic chaos escalated, major financial institutions began issuing dire warnings. Goldman Sachs revised its recession probability from 20% to 45%, citing extreme policy volatility and unprecedented structural imbalances in global trade relations. Morgan Stanley cut its GDP growth forecast to near zero, while Barclays described the U.S. economy as standing on the edge of a prolonged stagflation cycle. The uncertainty was further fueled by unpredictable currency fluctuations. The U.S. dollar swung violently against major currencies, confusing international investors and triggering capital flight to safer assets like gold, the Japanese yen, and even cryptocurrencies. Adding to the market's nausea was the Federal Reserve's inability to respond with interest rate adjustments. Fed Chair Lisa Cook stated in a press briefing that the instability introduced by external trade policy decisions has made our tools temporarily ineffective. The Liberation Day disaster. Tariffs with no logic. At the center of the storm was a surprise policy dubbed Liberation Day, an executive order announced by President Trump with no prior consultation with trade experts or congressional leaders. The order imposed new sweeping tariffs on virtually every major trading partner, including strategic allies such as Japan, the EU, Canada, and even U.S. military bases overseas. One line in the policy stood out for its absurdity. Tariffs would be calculated by dividing the trade deficit by total exports, a metric that exists in no known economic textbook and puzzled economists across the board. It's like calculating your grocery bill by dividing your debt by what's in your fridge, said Harvard economist Jason Fuentes. It defies logic. Tariffs were even applied to Diego Garcia, a remote U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean, and bizarrely, to an uninhabited Antarctic island. To defend American sovereignty, Trump's press secretary claimed. Critics called it unserious and borderline delusional. Trump tweets, then gulfs. As financial markets plunged and panic swept across Wall Street, President Trump delivered a cryptic tweet. The surgery is complete. The patient is recovering and will be stronger than ever. Intended as reassurance, the message instead sparked confusion and ridicule. Economists called it nonsensical, and journalists across the political spectrum questioned its meaning. Then came the photo that would define the moment. Trump, smiling on the golf course at Mar-a-Lago, driver in hand, while headlines flashed red with the news of a historic market crash. His decision to leave Washington during a financial freefall ignited a firestorm of criticism. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow described it as the single most negligent day of his presidency. Even typically friendly outlets like Fox News struggled to defend the optics. Social media exploded with side-by-side images. Main Street in turmoil, Trump on the green. Hashtags like the Golf Gate and Market Mulligan trended for hours. The contrast between the president's calm leisure and the nation's economic chaos became symbolic of what many saw as a deep disconnect between leadership and lived reality. In a moment of crisis, Trump chose the fairway over the Situation Room, and the public noticed. Elon Musk's cheese hat and billionaire backfire. In the midst of this turmoil, billionaire Elon Musk found himself in the center of an unexpected political sideshow. Musk had funneled over $19 million into the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, backing MAGA-aligned candidate Brad Schimmel, a former state attorney general and Trump loyalist. But despite the eye-popping investment, Judge Susan Crawford, a center-left Democracy First candidate, won in a landslide. Musk's campaign gimmicks, including wearing a cheese-shaped hat, handing out cash to selfie takers near polling stations, and reportedly flying in influencers to push last-minute support, failed spectacularly. His venture capitalist approach to democracy flopped in the face of local grassroots support for Crawford. After the loss, conservative media scrambled to explain it away. Some blamed George Soros. Others suggested Musk helped more than he hurt. But Crawford's victory speech cut through the noise. As a little girl growing up in Chippewa Falls, I never could have imagined I'd be taking on the richest man in the world. And winning. A Republican Party on the brink. Perhaps the most dangerous development for the Trump camp wasn't Wall Street or the media. It was the internal revolt brewing among the MAGA faithful. In forums, conservative talk shows, and even Fox segments, lifelong Trump supporters began to express doubt. Retirees in Florida said their 401ks were down by half. Small business owners in Texas blamed the tariffs for a 30% drop in revenue. Bill Ackman, once an enthusiastic Trump backer, publicly criticized the administration's economic nihilism. He warned that investor confidence was being destroyed in real time and predicted a winter that will last longer than any business cycle. Elon Musk echoed those concerns, calling for a US-EU free trade zone and slamming the White House's vendetta economics. Even conservative pundits like Ben Shapiro and Laura Ingraham tiptoed into criticism, warning that without rapid course correction, the Republican Party could face a 60-seat wipeout in the upcoming midterms. Stephen Miller's escape from America. Justice, in a moment that stunned even hardened political observers, former Trump advisor Stephen Miller ignited national outrage by advocating for the mass removal of undocumented immigrants without due process. Speaking on a Fringe podcast, Miller declared that the government should simply pick them up and get them out, bypassing courts, immigration judges, and legal appeals altogether. The comment was quickly dubbed the Escape from America doctrine, a chilling reference to dystopian fiction, where citizens vanish without warning or recourse. Legal scholars were swift and scathing in their response. Constitutional experts labeled Miller's proposal proto-fascist, arguing it violated the most basic tenets of the American legal system: due process, judicial oversight, and human rights. Immigration rights organizations warned of a dangerous normalization of authoritarian rhetoric, noting the historical parallels to internment, exile, and ethnic cleansing. Social media exploded with criticism, with many posting black and white photos of Ellis Island and refugee families alongside Miller's, quote, underscoring the hypocrisy of such views in a nation built by immigrants. Even some conservatives distanced themselves, calling the remarks politically toxic and morally indefensible. In an election year already fraught with division, Miller's words added fuel to a fire many fear is burning out of control. Trust me, a sales pitch with a track record. Despite the clear warning signs, Trump's media apparatus continues to push the narrative that he is a master negotiator, a businessman with the skills to outdeal world leaders and win for America. But that image doesn't hold up under scrutiny. In fact, Trump's personal business track record raises more red flags than confidence. Consider Atlantic City, once a vibrant center of East Coast tourism and gambling. Trump's casino empire there didn't just falter, it imploded. Every single one of his casinos filed for bankruptcy. He took profits, walked away from creditors, and left workers and investors holding the bag. Then came Trump University, an operation that turned the promise of education into a scam. The institution was shut down amid lawsuits and widespread complaints of fraud, ultimately resulting in a $25 million settlement. These aren't just missteps. They are signs of systemic mismanagement. More recently, Trump was convicted in both civil and criminal court for falsifying financial statements to inflate his net worth, a move that triggered massive market uncertainty and cast a long shadow over investor confidence. If these are the business principles being applied to national economic policy, the American public has every reason to be alarmed. Fringe advisors and purges inside the White House. Amid the economic chaos, the Trump administration's decision-making process has come under increasing scrutiny. Instead of consulting traditional economic experts or conferring with the Federal Reserve, President Trump recently held a private meeting with Lower, a fringe figure known for promoting conspiracy theories, including the widely discredited 9/11 truther movement. What followed was even more troubling. Within days of the meeting, 3 senior members of the National Security Council were dismissed. Whether this was coincidence or consequence remains unclear, but the optics are deeply unsettling. When fringe voices have the ear of the president and seasoned experts are purged in the aftermath, Americans are right to ask, Who is actually shaping U.S. policy? This isn't just a matter of political theater. It's about national security, economic stability, and the future of U.S. alliances. A senior financial strategist summarized the situation with a haunting metaphor. They're burning down the house just to cook a steak. That line has become something of a rallying cry for critics of the administration, an indictment of reckless strategy masquerading as reform. Pop the cork or pop the market? The 200% wine tariff. In one of his boldest and most bizarre moves yet, Trump has threatened to impose a 200% tariff on European alcoholic beverages, including wine, cognac, and champagne. His justification? The European Union placed a 50% tariff on American whiskey, an act Trump labeled as nasty. The counter-threat was immediate. In a post on Truth Social, Trump declared, "If this tariff is not removed immediately, the U.S. will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wines, champagnes, and alcoholic products." His administration frames it as a defense of American steel and aluminum, tying unrelated goods into a broad and aggressive retaliatory measure. But this is no trivial wine war. The EU exports over $13 billion in alcohol to the U.S., with French and Italian wines at the forefront. A 200% tariff would cripple that trade, sending prices for imported wines soaring. European wine producers, especially in France, Italy, and Spain, have warned they would be forced to stop exports entirely to the U.S. market. Japan fires back. The collapse of strategic trust. President Trump's 25% tariff on imported automobiles has sparked a fierce backlash from Japan, a longtime ally and critical trade partner. Tokyo's response was sharp and immediate, with the Japanese Foreign Ministry issuing a rare public threat. Every option is on the table. If the U.S. harms us, we will retaliate accordingly. The move marked a dramatic escalation in tensions between two nations historically bound by mutual security and economic cooperation. The stakes couldn't be higher. Japan is the largest foreign investor in the United States, with its companies supporting over 1 million American jobs. Nowhere is this more evident than in the automotive sector. Japanese giants like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan operate sprawling production plants across the American Midwest, employing thousands and contributing billions to local economies. Many of these vehicles are assembled in states like Kentucky, Ohio, and Alabama, often branded as American-made, despite their Japanese origins. Strategic fallout, economic loss meets military consequences. What began as an economic conflict is now spiraling into a full-blown strategic crisis. President Trump's 25% tariff on imported Japanese automobiles has not only strained trade relations, it's jeopardizing a critical pillar of U.S. national security. Japan isn't merely a major trade partner, it's the cornerstone of America's military presence in East Asia, a nation that has historically served as the United States' frontline ally in counterbalancing Chinese power in the Pacific. That relationship, built painstakingly over 7 decades since World War II, is now under threat. Tokyo's response to the tariffs has been more than rhetorical. Behind the diplomatic language lies a clear signal. Japan will not be economically coerced without consequences. In recent years, Japan has already begun an unprecedented military modernization program, increasing its defense budget to record highs and loosening post-war restrictions on the use of force. It has purchased U.S.-made F-35 fighter jets, missile defense systems, and cutting-edge surveillance technology. But that spending, previously channeled toward American defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, could now be redirected. The fragile web of global alliances. This breakdown is not happening in isolation. If Japan, a model U.S. ally with shared democratic values, deep economic ties, and decades of military coordination, feels betrayed. Other nations are watching closely. Allies in Southeast Asia, Europe, and even the Middle East are taking note. If the United States is willing to impose punitive tariffs on Japan, what might it do to others? This perception could trigger a domino effect as countries reevaluate the reliability of their American partnerships. The result could be a slow but steady unraveling of the U.S.-led post-war alliance system. Multilateral agreements that exclude the U.S., like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which Japan helped lead after Trump withdrew from the original TPP, may become the norm. Defense coalitions might start forming without U.S. participation, with countries like South Korea, India, Australia, and members of the European Union exploring new diplomatic and military frameworks that bypass Washington entirely. Viral comedy or political earthquake. Bill Maher's segment that shook the internet. What began as a quirky comedy bit quickly morphed into a cultural lightning bolt. Bill Maher, never one to shy away from controversy, struck a raw nerve with a late-night comedy segment that amassed over 5 million views within 72 hours, eventually topping 27 million across platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter. But this wasn't just another laugh-fueled rant. It was a carefully orchestrated strike on the soft underbelly of America's political psyche. Maher's segment, laced with satire, pathos, and pointed jabs, pulled the rug out from under Trump world and delivered a blistering critique of both personal and political dysfunction. The bit began harmlessly enough. Maher read aloud a 22 rules for dating list found inside a used car. According to his monologue, it had been scrawled by a bitter ex-girlfriend and included rules like never save another girl's number, reply to all texts within 10 minutes, and never question what I do. The list was so rigid and militaristic. Maher joked it read like a relationship contract authored by a North Korean general. Social media exploded. Debate forums on Reddit, TikTok reaction videos, and long Twitter threads dissected every rule. For 2 full weeks, people online argued whether the list was toxic, hilarious, or heartbreakingly relatable. The return of looser lumor and the power of the political ultimatum. Then came the next wave. Maher introduced far-right firebrand Laura Loomer, who he mockingly dubbed Looser Loomer, as the face of a political cult gone off the rails. A dozen Republican candidates tried to stop Trump and failed, Maher said. Hillary couldn't, Mueller couldn't, Trumpers couldn't. But there's one person who might be able to stop Donald Trump, Melania. He clarified that it wasn't an anti-feminist suggestion. It was a strategic one. Maher called it the power of the ultimatum, suggesting that while men respond poorly to facts, logic, and consequences, they can be completely derailed by the threat of losing status, intimacy, or emotional control. It's a tale as old as time, he quipped. The internet had a field day. Feminist influencers weighed in with TikToks about soft power, emotional leverage, and how Melania, by simply walking away, could collapse the illusion of Trump's invincibility. Conservative circles, on the other hand, accused Maher of attacking traditional marriage and undermining loyalty. It didn't matter. Maher's gambit worked. He had cracked open the cult of personality around Trump using nothing but satire, irony, and social commentary. The mockery loop. Outrage as a feedback machine. Perhaps the most brilliant part of Maher's performance was his meta-awareness of the media cycle itself. He laid it bare. Joke, outrage, viral reaction, mockery, Trump overreaction, more fuel. And just as he predicted, Trump took the bait. Within 48 hours, Trump posted 3 rants on Truth Social. condemning Maher as deranged, failing, and an unfunny weasel who never gets the ratings. Predictably, this only amplified the segment. Every rant generated news coverage, which looped back into social media, which gave the original bit even more legs. Maher, in his final line, smirked and said, "I don't create the absurdity, I just expose it." What he exposed wasn't just Trump's thin skin, it was a systemic flaw in the political attention economy. The more absurd things become, the more clicks they earn. And in that vortex, late-night comedy becomes frontline journalism. Semiconductor wars, a crisis. Wrapped in silicon while America chuckled over late-night impersonations and sound bites from a golfing president, a quieter but far more seismic conflict was boiling beneath the surface. A technological Cold War with global consequences. The battleground? Microchips? The stakes? The future of economic and military supremacy. In early 2025, the United States intensified its campaign to isolate China from cutting-edge semiconductor technologies, reimposing harsh export controls, sweeping tariffs, and supply chain restrictions aimed at crippling Beijing's ambitions in electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and 5G infrastructure. The message from Washington was clear: whoever controls the chips controls the future. At the heart of this silent war lies an unlikely protagonist: South Korea. Known globally for its consumer electronics, K-pop exports, and Michelin-starred cuisine, Korea is also the world's semiconductor powerhouse. With companies like Samsung and SK Hynix leading the charge, South Korea is more than just a supplier. It's a keystone in the global technology arch. And as geopolitical fault lines deepen, Korea is being asked to choose: the open market of China or the strategic umbrella of the United States. The Korean dilemma: choosing between markets. The numbers tell the story. In the past year alone, South Korean chip exports to China plummeted by 31%. That's not a minor fluctuation. It's an earthquake in a $500 billion global industry. The reason? Compliance with Washington's sanctions. Korean firms are now required to obtain U.S. licenses to sell advanced chips and semiconductor equipment to Chinese companies, effectively forcing Seoul into America's techno-strategic camp. Faced with the prospect of angering their largest export customer, Korean officials weighed their options. The final decision came down to long-term security and alignment. Some trade-offs are unavoidable, a senior South Korean trade official said in a press conference. As we deepen our alliance with the U.S., losing part of our Chinese market is a price we're willing to pay. That sentence crystallized a new global reality. The semiconductor war is not merely an economic matter, it is existential. Korea's choice reflects a deeper calculation about sovereignty, values, and the future of technological governance. In return for this loyalty, the United States has offered a substantial package: exemptions from certain tariffs, preferential access to federal innovation grants, co-investments in chip fabrication labs, fabs, and integration into U.S.-led R&D infrastructure initiatives. Washington's strategy: a silicon curtain. At its core, the U.S. strategy revolves around erecting a new semiconductor iron curtain that isolates China from the most advanced components of the digital economy. Export controls now restrict the sale of extreme ultraviolet (EUV) lithography machines, the heart of cutting-edge chip production, from Dutch and Japanese manufacturers to China. Top-tier chip designs from U.S. companies like NVIDIA and AMD are banned for Chinese use. Even open-source chip architecture groups are tightening access. The logic is blunt. If you choke off China's access to advanced semiconductors, you don't just slow their smartphones, you hobble their AI surveillance systems, missile guidance tech, and quantum computing dreams. Washington is betting that with enough pressure, China's tech ascent can be stalled, or at least significantly delayed. China's aspirations, crippled or catalyzed. Of course, China hasn't sat idly by. Over the last decade, Beijing has poured billions into its domestic semiconductor industry through initiatives like Made in China 2025 and the Big Fund. It has subsidized chip startups, incentivized repatriated talent, and snapped up foreign engineers at aggressive salaries. But even with the capital, China faces monumental hurdles. It still lacks the core machinery, such as ASML's EUV tools, necessary to produce chips at the 5-nanometer scale or below. Its homegrown fabrication facilities remain several generations behind those in Taiwan, South Korea, and the US. Major firms like Huawei, BYD, and Xiaomi are feeling the pinch. Product launches have been delayed or scaled back. AI chips for server farms are now harder to source. Smartphones are reverting to older designs. Even the rollout of China's next-gen 5G infrastructure has slowed as key components grow scarce. One tech analyst described it as a domino effect in silicon. When one supplier disappears, the whole architecture collapses. The innovation pipeline becomes unpredictable, and project timelines spiral out of control. Laugh lines and supply chains. Two fronts, one fight. In one part of the world, comedy sketches parody presidents and expose the absurdities of modern politics. In another, silicon wafers and tariff schedules are redrawing the global map. But both are connected. Satire and semiconductor policy may seem like opposites, but they speak to the same forces: control, dependency, influence, and loyalty. In a digital world where every refrigerator, fighter jet, and cell tower runs on chips, technological allegiance becomes national allegiance. One late-night joke may define a political moment. One export rule may define a geopolitical era. Both are shaping the same story: a 21st century realignment where silicon, not steel, is the true measure of power. And for now, South Korea and the US are holding the lead, while China races to catch up, isolated in a world it once hoped to dominate.